approval of the January 13th and 24 minutes. I'll take them together. Is there a motion? Jennifer and Eden, any questions or comments in regards to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Next is reports for the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, Unsafe Structures and Development Summary. If there's no questions or comments to those, we'll receive and file those. Seeing no questions, move to the first zoning case, ZBA-2022-000006, petition of Briscoe Financial LLC. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Eden and Sharon. Andrew?
Hey, Andrew, make sure the microphone's on, or you're at least speaking into it.
Here we go. All right. This is a special use request from section 20-5.5.2.2.c, which allows for overnight accommodations, provided they meet the requirements set forth in section 7.8, and provided that no more than 5 rooms or suites of rooms are rented, and rooms are not rented for a period of more than 14 days. The petitioner proposes to provide overnight accommodations on a short-term rental basis. The petitioner does propose to offer an entire 952 square foot, 2-bedroom, single-family dwelling with a 280 square foot attached garage for rent on a short-term basis through the Airbnb and VRBO websites. The subject parcel is located on North Front Street in Chillicothe Township. There are 2 consents and 3 objections on file. One of the consents came from the previous property owner and who is now the adjacent property owner. We had another consent from Nancy and Mike Crawley of River Beach Drive, who are adjacent owners to another short-term rental that the petitioner owns. We had 3 objectors, Dick Lakaitis and Brenda Stubbs, who are adjacent property owners. We had their attorney, Steve Wakeman, speak at the Zoning Board of Appeals hearing, and then another objector, Sheila Strunk, who owns a property a couple houses up on North Front Street. Her concerns were that the parking might cause her some issues with the shared private drive. She did testify that she felt the restrictions addressed her concerns. The parcels and the subject parcel and all surrounding parcels are zoned R2 medium density residential. To the northwest and southwest of the subject parcel are single family dwellings. To the east is the Illinois River. The surrounding area includes a mix of commercial, zoning, and uses, as well as recreational uses. The Rome Youth Baseball Fields lie to the southwest, and riverfront property owned by the Chillicothe Park District is adjacent to the south. The entire house will be rented, and the use of the property will be similar to that of a single-family dwelling. The petitioner's request is consistent with the mixed residential, commercial, and recreational character of the surrounding area. The Airbnb listing states that no parties or events are allowed, and guests are limited to the number stated at the time of booking. The home is equipped with security cameras and tech doors and locks to ensure the safety of guests and the surrounding premises. Development standards for all overnight accommodations are outlined in section 20-7.8 of the UDO. The overnight accommodations definition of the ordinance includes bed and breakfasts, hotels, motels, as well as any type of commercial establishment where rooms are rented at a daily rate to the general public, which would include short-term rentals. The ordinance requires that the operator keep a log identifying the name, address, and phone number of all guests, and that the overnight accommodations not begin until the county has issued a certificate of occupancy. The ordinance requires that no more than 4 automobiles may be parked accessory to a single-family dwelling for a period of more than 72 continuous hours. The Chillicothe Road Commissioner submitted a comment on February 9th, the day prior to the Zoning Board of Appeals hearing. The Road Commissioner stated that he would forbid parking in and along the right-of-way of Washington Street and Front Street for the guests of the property. His concerns were flooding of roads and then egress of the shared private drive, as well as the intersection of Washington Street and Front Street. There were no conditions found by the Peoria City County Health Department to recommend denial of the request. It was their recommendation for the property owner to leave information regarding the on-site wastewater disposal system and water system for their guests, and to have guests notify the owners immediately of any problems during their stay. The petitioner's request is consistent with the unincorporated center and environmental corridor land use designations. The unincorporated center land use form is residential in character with small neighborhood commercial uses. The environmental corridor land use form recognizes the value of environmental corridors as recreational, residential, and economic attractions. The subject property's proximity to the Illinois River promotes visitor attraction through recreational and ecotourism opportunities and is in an area of mixed residential, commercial, and recreational uses. The petitioner's request is also consistent with the Peoria County growth strategy of generating economic opportunity and stability. The operation of overnight accommodations would provide income for a local business, and visitors to the area would have an additional option for lodging. Staff did recommend approval of this petition with 8 restrictions. 4 of those restrictions are ordinance requirements, but we wanted to specifically call them out. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommended approval by a vote of 4 to 2.
Motion to allow Brian to participate via teleconference. Eden, Jennifer, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? You there, Brian?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for not getting in. I was trying to get in, but I think I made a mistake. So
That's okay. Glad to have you. So, of the 8 restrictions, I think it's important to call out here from our conversation that we had last month. The certified mailing to the neighbors is a new one, and that is one that Miss Allison had suggested to make sure that there was numbers of contacts for the developer. We did not pursue the sign option because we had other issues with that. So we did add that in as a restriction on these 2 cases, which was not a previous restriction to any of the owners. And then this one had the extra one, which was because you'll notice the next one has 7 restrictions, and as Andrew pointed out, this one has about the shared driveway restriction. So the petitioners and objectors are both here too. I'll have a discussion around the horseshoe first and see if there needs to be any comments. Eden?
I know at our discussion last time, we talked about the guest log and how that might be onerous to have every single person. Is that's still part of the ordinance, though?
So that's still part of the ordinance. I think the idea is that to clean up the definition of what that entails, and that it would be required to have the person's name that is renting it and how many guests and how to contact the person that actually rented the facility, instead of having Jim, Angela, Shay, and Maggie stayed at the house. It would just be James Dillon rented it. Here's your address and contact information. So I think it's clearly of a definition of what you need. I think that would be the route we would go down for if we ask for a call log. And that can easily be produced within seconds from the sounds of it. Any other questions around the horseshoe? Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Lakaitis, Stubbs?
I don't really have anything to add to what was already introduced with the ZBA. I understand that you're restricted to that evidence. Anyway, we are asking that the request be approved. We will agree to the restrictions. Really nothing further to add to what you already have.
And I guess I would add on the conversation that we had about when we were talking about the last meeting, which this doesn't pertain to the case, but not having the signs, because what is ours, a 3-foot sign is the ordinance already, and if somebody stuck a big sign in their front yard, that would take away the character of the house, or so we thought the letter was the best option. So instead of having a full-time advertisement sign sitting in the house, that was not part of that, but that is the going back. Mr. Lakaitis or Brenda? Yeah.
if you please. My name's Richard Lakaitis. I'm one half owner of the property immediately to the north of the property in question at 16018 North Front Street, Rome, Illinois. I want to make sure that I wrote a letter to planning and zoning staff back on January 28th of 2022, and I want to make sure that that letter was received and considered by the committee.
I believe was that the letter that we read into the, it wasn't at the ZBA hearing?
I believe that's true. That's what I heard, but I'm just.
Yeah, I think the letter that you read, we actually even read into the record last month, and there was another record. I don't know if that was part of this upcoming hearing, but I know your letter was discussed, and there was a letter from Mr. Richard, if I'm going up, Richard John, is that correct?
Roger John.
Roger John, sorry. Those two letters, I believe, that was last month's meeting, we read those in, though. Okay. So,
Andrew, do you know if the letter was part of the record in the ZBA hearing?
The letter was part of the record in the
Okay.
ZBA hearing. To clarify, Mr. Dillon, the letter that you're referencing was specific to the discussion last month, whereas this letter, I believe Mr. Lakaitis is referencing, is specific to this particular case.
So it has been considered by the group. Is that correct? Okay, well then I'd like to just point out several issues raised by the letter, and I'd like to highlight those by way of argument. But there was a statement in zoning and planning staff's report to the Zoning Board of Appeals that this property is subject to flooding, only 1% chance of a flooding incident. Looking out the window this morning, I think that's clearly, it happens a lot more than 1%. Again, some other things. Substantial renovations were made to this house and a wooden deck. And I assume, Andrew, that alterations must be within the floodplain development standards in accordance with the section 20-7.14. And that's the case here. Okay. Environmental impact, there was a letter from the Peoria County Health Department, but it literally shed no light on the operational status of the septic system since no one has lived there. And it's my understanding, and this was part of the record, one person was there for about a year and it needed to be pumped. And if there were several gatherings there, and then porta potties were brought in from the outside. So I take exception to the report that everything's in fine working order when in fact it could hardly be considered in working order since it's not being utilized to the extent that would tell us whether or not it is functional. Yeah. So I think that's an issue. But the big issue here is the issue of parking places. And due to a miscommunication, the Chillicothe Township Road Commissioner's objection to the special report was not considered by staff when the staff made those recommendations. The staff's recommendations were authored on February 1st, 2022. And the letter from the Township Road Commissioner was not received until February 9th of 2022. And then you have to go to the substance of the letter, and I'd just like to highlight the fact that this gentleman, Rob Hulsizer, said, "I do not have an issue with special permit per se. However, due to the reduction in size of this property, as compared to the GIS mapping dimensions, which were part of our hearing before, he's opposed to the special use permit in his opinion, there's not enough room for 4 vehicles to park safely on the private property. Owners and guests must understand that parking in and along the right-of-way of Washington Street and Front Street is forbidden due to the ingress issues with properties to the north in the intersection of Washington and Front Street. And see map enclosed, and he provided a map of what he's talking about in terms of the fact that the boundary of Washington Street literally cuts off, it is a fair amount of parking that you'd normally think he would have, but it's really part of the street. And it even cuts across a so-called pickleball court to the neighbor's property to the west. The property's in a flood zone, the roads flood regularly, and all the right-of-way is relatively wide. The pavement is fairly narrow at this intersection. It would also create a safety hazard for property owners pulling out of the private driveway, that's where my property's located, and serving the owners to the north if the right-of-way parking were allowed along the paved right-of-way. So I think that's an issue that is properly raised at this time in terms of a denial of the special use request. However, if you were in fact going to approve it, we certainly agree with the restrictions as contained in staff's letter, but we'd go on to add some additional restrictions in terms of reducing the parking places to 2, not 4, but 2, and that some fencing requirements were considered. It's hard to tell where the property lines are down there, obviously. And
Was a fence brought up in the ZBA?
only in terms of the letter.
Mr. Elkitis had submitted an objection letter offering these same recommendations as part of the ZBA record.
Looking at the map of the property, where would a fence even go? Because I can see the pickleball court on the map.
Well, it'd go, I'm sorry, it'd go to the north of the subject property. It'd run from the seawall west.
Mr. McCarthy, do you know if that was anything that your client had brought up during the meeting either?
Yeah, there was a discussion before the zoning board, and the fence was just not practical. They were talking about putting a fence along the deck area, and the ZBA did not consider it, and neither did the planning staff. I think I would also make the point that this has all been discussed before the ZBA. This is not a fact-finding committee. These things have all been discussed, resolved. There is a recommendation by staff with restrictions. The operator, the owner, is willing to abide by the restrictions. If you want to look at the parking, I would ask Andrew maybe to put the picture up. There's ample parking. There's a 2-car garage that will be available for guests. There's room for at least 4 cars. The picture that the staff showed, there's a dumpster in the driveway, and there's still ample room for cars.
Okay. Mr. McCarthy, you got a couple more things?
Simply put, not so. The areas Attorney McCarthy's referring to are part of the public street.
Discussion from the board? Ms. Williams?
Are there any better pictures? These pictures that we have in the packet are not really very good. I can't really tell.
You gonna pull up GIS?
In terms of the fence, can we get some clarity on whether that was discussed and decided against, or where that landed with the ZBA?
I asked that because I didn't know if that was discussed as prominent as it was in the one case where a fence was basically agreed upon. So I don't necessarily know if a fence was really brought up in this discussion in depth. Yeah, so to the findings of the fact, I don't know. Whereas in the last case, I think it went on for 2 hours over whether or not, and a big part of that discussion was over a fence, and the petitioner was agreeable to a fence and that. So this is the findings of fact of this case of the 2 and no fence. I just was asking for some clarity of myself on the fence because I don't recall it being a center of discussion on this one as it was in the very first case that we brought up. So I don't have a very good answer for you either. Is that accurate, Andrew, other than the statement?
I don't believe there was a whole lot of discussion on the fence. It was something that staff had communicated the concerns to the petitioner, and the petitioner was opposed to that restriction, and I believe that's as far as it got. Certainly, our FAR TV seems to still be warm enough, but I've got a couple different slides here. So here's the aerial view of the parcel in question. You notice Front Street doesn't extend, but there's a driveway that comes off of Front and Washington, which is shared by, I believe there's 5 houses back in this area. And so the restriction that staff has proposed specifically states no parking on that shared driveway. Somewhat zoomed in, you can see that there is a garage. Our aerial views are not, fantastic to identify such, but we do have a garage in this area, and I'll show a video here in a moment that can help illustrate some of this. And then we've got this driveway area. This area down in here is actually a boat launch maintained and owned by the Chillicothe Park District. So zoning, land use form. So this particular video is taken from the perspective of Front Street. And so I'll play that for you as soon as it's finished loading. So I think to Mr. McCarthy's point, there's a trailer being pulled by a large truck and then a dumpster in the driveway at the time of this video. And then this would be the boat launch here. So this is our aerial on Washington with the county's vehicle parked in the right-of-way. This is a neighboring property. This is the perspective, perhaps from the driveway as you approach Mr. Lakaitis' property. So this view here, this is Mr. Lakaitis' property next door. And then we continue to work our way back to a portion of the deck facing north. And then I'll have a third video here. This is taken from the perspective of the river itself, or along the river.
The question would be, so where that truck and that dumpster is their property? like it, according to
Excuse
that
me?
video.
I really can't
Answer
confirm that that's their property. There's not really a survey stake that we've been able to identify to that regard. It certainly appears it's being utilized as their property, but I can't confirm that.
Okay.
If I could just comment to that, Chairman Dillon, if you could show the picture of the garage with the construction vehicle and the pickup truck, that clearly is their property. And it's right in front of their garage door. So if that's the street, they couldn't get into their garage. That is not the street, that's their driveway, that's their property. There's ample room for certainly for 4 vehicles, and there's 2 vehicles that can be parked in the garage.
And in all due respect, that's incorrect.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes.
Into the river.
Yes. And so then you'll notice in the one video that some barricade or barrier has been added to increase the safety.
So was the truck pulled in at an angle? So it was,
The truck and trailer were the trailer was likely parked right about the edge of the red line, and the truck was likely parked just outside of the red line.
was it encroaching on the boat ramp?
It was not in our video. And the GIS photos we use are for reference purposes.
Only.
Can't assure or that they are not 100% accurate. Only a survey can tell that.
And that, I think, is addressed with the restriction in there about no parking on the right-of-way or on these 2 streets.
The proposed restriction, there's 2 restrictions that would address that. One is that there's no parking on the shared drive.
Correct.
The other is that the petitioner has to be able to provide for a specific number of spaces on the property. It was the road commissioner's position that vehicles could not be parked on the right-of-way, but we don't have the jurisdiction to enforce that.
Is that a light pole that the thing's on? No, the sign that you're talking about.
It's some sort of utility pole. I don't know if it's a light pole or not.
That is probably the right of way, 99%.
Sharon?
Is the road, I know it's a Front Street address, but is that considered a private, it's considered a private drive? So
Yes.
it's very narrow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just clarifying questions. We need to, I don't think that was off topic of what was presented.
I believe the report identifies it as an 18-foot shared driveway.
I do think that they tried to take into consideration, and when it was brought up, I do know from Kathy, and I think it was addressed there, the letter from the township commissioner did come in after staff's report. So, but I think that was taken into consideration during the ZBA, and that's why it was restricting it to 4 cars and then no parking on the shared driveway. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All ayes and one nay. Next is ZBA 2022-0007, petition of Briscoe Financial LLC. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Eden, Sharon, Andrew.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dillon. This is ZBA case ZBA 2022-000007, which is a special use request from section 20-5.5.2.2.c of the Unified Development Ordinance, which allows for overnight accommodations, provided that they meet the requirements set forth in section 7.8, and provided that no more than 5 rooms or suites of rooms are rented, and rooms are not rented for a period of more than 14 days. The petitioner proposes to provide overnight accommodations on a short-term rental basis. In this case, the petitioner, Briscoe Financial LLC, proposes to offer an entire 1,256 square foot, 3-bedroom, single-family dwelling with a 1,226 square foot attached garage below the house. This house was elevated in 2012 to mitigate flood impacts. This is for rent on short-term basis through the Airbnb and VRBO websites. Subject parcel is located on North River Beach Drive in Chillicothe Township. There were 2 consents and 0 objections on file in this case. The consent was from a neighbor of a different Airbnb or short-term rental owned by Briscoe Financial. They commented that they had not experienced any negative impacts, and in fact, Mr. Briscoe's properties have been an improvement to the community. The subject parcels and all surrounding parcels are zoned R2 medium density residential. Single-family dwellings are located to the north and west of the parcel. 4 vacant lots owned by Peoria County and the Chillicothe Park District are located to the south. The Illinois River is located to the east. The petitioner's request is consistent with the residential character of the surrounding area. The entire house will be rented, and the use of the property will be similar to that of a single-family dwelling. The Airbnb listing states that no parties or events are allowed, and guests are limited to the number stated at the time of booking. The home is equipped with security cameras and tech doors and locks to ensure the safety of guests and the surrounding premises. Development standards for all overnight accommodations are outlined in section 20-7.8 of the UDO. This includes bed and breakfasts, hotels, motels, and any type of commercial establishment where rooms are rented at a daily rate to the general public, which would include short-term rentals. The ordinance requires that the operator keep a log identifying the name, address, and phone number of all guests, and that overnight accommodations not begin until a certificate of occupancy has been issued. The ordinance also requires that no more than 4 automobiles may be parked accessory to a single-family dwelling for a period of more than 72 continuous hours. The proposed use is consistent with generated vehicle trips of other permitted uses in this zoning district. There were no comments from the Chillicothe Road Commissioner. There were no conditions found that would cause the Peoria City County Health Department to recommend denial of the request. It was the department's recommendation for the property owner to leave information regarding the on-site wastewater disposal system and water system for their guests, and to have guests notify the owners immediately of any problems during their stay. The petitioner's request is consistent with the unincorporated center and environmental corridor land use designations. Unincorporated center land use form is residential in character with small neighborhood commercial uses. The environmental corridor land use form recognizes the value of environmental corridors as recreational, residential, and economic attractions. The subject property's proximity to the Illinois River promotes visitor attraction through recreational and ecotourism opportunities. Staff did recommend approval with 7 restrictions. 4 of those restrictions are those same ordinance requirements. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommended approval by a vote of 6-0.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Next is ZBA 2022-000012, petition of Cornwall Solar LLC. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Mr. Watkins and Mr. Windisch. Andrew?
Thank you. This is a special use request from section 20-5.1.3.2.f of the Unified Development Ordinance. This section allows for a special use in the A1 Agricultural Preservation Zoning District for a solar energy generation facility, provided that the conditions in section 7.17, ground-mounted solar energy equipment, of these regulations are met. The petitioner proposes to construct a 40 megawatt utility scale solar energy generation facility. The proposal will be located on 3 parcels totaling approximately 272.5 acres along West Laura Road, west of Elliott Road in Princeville Township, and south of the unincorporated town of Monica. The 3 sites consist of a northern piece, which is 118.1 acres, a western piece, which is 74.4 acres, and an eastern piece, which is 80 acres. There are 2 consents and 0 objections on file. Joyce Blumenshine from the Sierra Club, who I believe submitted a letter. That letter was what she spoke into the record at the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then Paul Flynn from the IBEW. He commented that this is an Illinois developer committed to using skilled union labor and local jobs. All 3 parcels are zoned A1 agricultural preservation and have been used for agricultural production. Adjacent parcels are also zoned A1. There are 3 adjacent residential parcels. The Ameren, Illinois Monica switching station, which is the proposed site of an interconnection, is also adjacent to the project area on Laura Road. Of the 272.5 acres, 250 acres will be covered with the solar panels. This includes rows of photovoltaic cell panels mounted on posts driven into the ground. The panels will be installed in a north-south configuration on a mounting system that will rotate the panels to track the sun throughout the day. The facility is intended to operate for at least 25 years. In order to minimize impact on neighboring residential properties, the panels will include an anti-reflective coating to minimize glare and a 7-foot chain link fence with a locked gate to enclose all panels and electrical equipment on site. The petitioner stated that the panels are almost inaudible, and careful placement of inverters and transformers in relation to the adjacent residential areas will bring noise levels to less than 50 decibels when measured at the property line. This decibel level is similar to a conversation. The petitioner will also use pollinator-friendly landscaping where possible and vegetation maintenance that limits runoff. The petitioner's proposal includes standards of section 7.17 with regards to setbacks, height, design and installation, lighting, security fencing, warning signage. The petitioner did submit a utility connection pre-application report from Ameren, Illinois, indicating a likely interconnection site of the Monica switching substation. Ameren did comment that they will review the full interconnection prior to a building permit issuance. There was a letter from the Akron-Princeville Fire District submitted that stated no cause for objection at this time. The Health Department had no objections. Neither the Peoria County Highway Department or the Princeville Township Road Commissioner had any objections at the time of report. Both did comment that they would require road use agreements and access permits prior to construction. The Federal Aviation Authority issued a letter indicating no hazard to air navigation. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources has reviewed the proposal and found no threatened or endangered species in the project area. A LISA was conducted on the parcels, which scored 207 out of 300, a medium rating for agricultural production. The Peoria County Future Land Use Map designates this area as agricultural preservation. Solar energy generation facilities are not an identified use in the comprehensive plan. However, the request will not disrupt adjacent agricultural operations and will be returned to a condition reasonably similar to the condition prior to development, including the replacement of topsoil at the time of decommissioning. Staff recommended approval with 7 restrictions. The ZBA recommended approval with those same restrictions by a vote of 6-0.
And Kirsten Sheets is here with Trajectory Energy too. Did you want to add anything or just open for questions? Any questions? I think this is an exciting project so I'm not seeing any comments or questions. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Unanimous. And last is the ZBA 2022-00013 petition of Peoria County. This is a rollover from last month.
Right,
Is
so
there a
this is a
motion?
text, oh, sorry.
Mr. Windish, Ms. Williams.
The text amendment to amend Chapter 20, Appendix A fee schedule of the Peoria County Code. Last month, the board voted to approve some amendments to Section 3.2 and Article 11 of the UDO. Because of a misprint in the Peoria Journal-Star, we had to take this case separately. It is strictly a clarification of the fee schedule for special use submittals. It's not changing the fees whatsoever. It's utilizing the verbiage that was adopted last month in the definitions to help clarify how that fee will be calculated. But it is nothing different than historically what has been done.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions, comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Next up would be miscellaneous. Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you.